Seeds of Change: Agriculture's Hidden Influence on Global Power by Mpho Sekati. Introduction. We often think of power in our world as military might, technological innovation, or financial markets. But there's an invisible force that shapes global politics more fundamentally than all of these: agriculture. I am Mpho Sekati, and in this audiobook, I'll reveal how the growing, trading, and controlling of food has quietly reshaped global power in ways that rarely make headlines. From 2020 to 2025, we witnessed a profound transformation in global food systems. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed vulnerabilities we never knew existed. Climate change redrew the map of agricultural production. Digital technologies created new dependencies, and geopolitical tensions increasingly expressed themselves through who controls the food on your plate. This is not just a story about farming. This is a story about power. Chapter 1: When the pandemic broke our food system. In April 2020, as COVID lockdowns trapped a quarter of humanity in their homes, a paradox emerged in our food system. Farmers dumped millions of liters of milk while grocery store shelves stood empty. In India, 40% of winter crops rotted in fields. In America, dairy farmers poured rivers of milk down drains. The pandemic revealed a truth we had forgotten. A globalized food system brings efficiency in normal times, but creates profound vulnerability during crisis. Countries responded by turning inward. By mid-2020, 26 countries had restricted food exports, choosing to feed their citizens first. Nations with little agricultural capacity scrambled to secure supplies. Singapore, which imports 90% of its food, launched an ambitious plan to produce 30% of its nutrition domestically by 2030. The United Arab Emirates, a desert nation, committed to increasing domestic food production by 60%. After decades of globalization, food nationalism returned with stunning speed. The message was clear: in a crisis, you cannot rely on global markets to feed your people. Chapter 2: The Battle for Africa's Agricultural Data. By 2022, a new form of colonialism had emerged across Africa, one based not on land occupation but on data acquisition. The global market for agricultural data reached $1.3 billion, with projections to hit $6 billion by 2026. This data, soil conditions, crop yields, weather patterns, farmer behavior, had become extraordinarily valuable. Across Africa, a consistent pattern developed. International companies provided free digital services to farmers in exchange for unrestricted access to their data. This information was then aggregated, analyzed, and monetized, generating billions in value while farmers received only a fraction of the benefits. In Tanzania, 45,000 cashew farmers began using a European company's mobile app, offering weather forecasts and pest management advice. What they didn't realize was that the company was simultaneously collecting unprecedented data on Tanzania's cashew production, information that gave it significant market advantages. By 2023, the same company had become a major cashew buyer, purchasing at prices 7 to 12% below competitors while increasing its profit margins by 14%. The economics were stark. Between 2020 and 2023, agricultural data collected from African farms generated approximately 2.3 billion euros in value for technology providers, while farmers themselves received only about 300 million euros in benefits. But resistance emerged. By 2024, farmer-controlled data platforms in Ghana had 230,000 registered users who received 9.3% better prices than those using foreign platforms. South Africa launched a data sovereignty initiative that by early 2024 had onboarded 15,000 farmers and processed 2.5 million data points daily. The battle for Africa's agricultural data had begun. Chapter 3: The Seed Wars. When Russian missiles struck Ukraine's grain silos in 2022, the world witnessed agriculture being used as an explicit weapon of war. But this was merely the visible manifestation of a longer-running conflict over control of global agriculture, what we might call the Seed Wars. By 2020, just 4 companies controlled more than 60% of the global commercial seed market. This concentration of power over the fundamental tools of agriculture represented a form of influence more consequential than military might. The financial scale was significant. Between 2020 and 2023, the global commercial seed market grew from $45 billion to $60 billion, with patents on plant genetic material generating $7.5 billion in licensing revenue. Nowhere was this conflict more evident than in Africa. Tanzania initially passed strict seed laws criminalizing farmers for saving and exchanging traditional seeds, a practice fundamental to their agriculture for centuries. After widespread protests, the government reversed course, creating a system that protected both commercial interests and farmers' rights. Beyond these visible conflicts, a genetic Cold War intensified. China's Seed Revitalization Plan allocated $5.3 billion to develop advanced seed technologies. Russia established the world's largest seed bank in Svalbard, containing 1.2 million samples. By 2024, China had filed more patents for drought-resistant crop varieties than all other countries combined. The message was clear. In a climate-changed world, controlling genetic resources means controlling food security itself. Chapter 4: Water Wars and Hydro Diplomacy. Water remains the most fundamental agricultural input, yet its availability has become increasingly contested. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile, completed in 2022, gave Ethiopia unprecedented control over water resources that ultimately flowed to Sudan and Egypt, transforming power dynamics in the region. By 2023, approximately 1.9 billion people lived in areas with high water stress, with agricultural irrigation accounting for 70% of global freshwater withdrawals. A concept critical to understanding this dynamic is virtual water, the water embedded in agricultural products traded internationally. By 2023, the global virtual water trade exceeded 2.3 trillion cubic meters annually, a massive transfer of the world's most essential agricultural resource. When Egypt imports 12 million tons of wheat annually, it is effectively importing 15.6 billion cubic meters of virtual water, equivalent to nearly 20% of the Nile's annual flow. This creates profound dependency that shapes Egypt's entire foreign policy approach. Meanwhile, a technological disruption emerged: agricultural desalination. Breakthroughs developed in Israel and Saudi Arabia reduced energy requirements by 60%, making desalinated irrigation economically viable. By 2024, Saudi Arabia was irrigating over 300,000 hectares with desalinated water, effectively decoupling high-value agricultural production from natural water constraints. These developments suggest a future where agricultural power may increasingly align with energy resources rather than natural water availability, a fundamental reshaping of global agricultural geography. Chapter 5: Digital Agriculture and the New Dependency. By 2023, precision agriculture using digital technologies to optimize farming had been implemented on 27% of larger-scale commercial farms worldwide. In developed agricultural economies, that figure exceeded 60%. The efficiency gains were undeniable. Yields increased 15 to 30%, while inputs decreased 20 to 40%. But these improvements came with a hidden cost: dependency on the digital infrastructure underlying modern agriculture. By 2024, just 7 companies controlled more than 80% of the global digital agriculture market. 5 were based in the United States, 1 in China, and 1 in Europe. This concentration created new agricultural dependencies more subtle than previous eras. When a farmer adopts a digital platform, they become locked into that company's ecosystem. Switching costs reached 14 to 22% of annual technology investments, effectively trapping farmers in technological relationships they couldn't afford to leave. Between 2020 and 2025, Africa became the primary battleground in this competition. Foreign investment in African agricultural technology increased from $30 million in 2019 to over $450 million by 2023. What made these developments particularly significant? Unlike traditional inputs, digital agriculture systems become more valuable over time as they accumulate data, creating a data network effect where early entrants gain exponentially increasing advantages. In response, indigenous innovation emerged across the global south. India's digital Kizan platform reached 100 million farmers by 2024. In Africa, the Pan-African Agricultural Data Cooperative launched in 2023. Reaching 870,000 member farmers across 17 countries by 2024-2025. The battle for who would control the farm of the future had begun. Chapter 6: Climate Change Redraws the Map. Between 2020 and 2025, global agriculture experienced the most significant geographical shift since the Columbian Exchange. Rising temperatures expanded growing seasons in northern regions while making traditional agricultural areas increasingly marginal. Russia's arable land increased by 37 million hectares, an area larger than Germany, as warming temperatures made northern regions suitable for cultivation. Canada's wheat production area expanded northward by 160 kilometers. Conversely, 14% of previously productive agricultural land in sub-Saharan Africa experienced severe yield declines due to changing rainfall patterns and heat stress. These shifts created new agricultural powers while undermining traditional ones. Russia and Canada saw agricultural exports increase by 28% and 22% respectively, while historically productive regions in the global south declined. Nations positioned themselves aggressively to capitalize on these geographic shifts. Russia's Arctic Agriculture Initiative invested $12 billion in infrastructure to support northern expansion. Satellite imagery revealed that 2.7 million hectares of previously non-agricultural land in northern latitudes was converted to cropland between 2020 and 2024, the fastest expansion of agricultural frontier in modern history. Meanwhile, a race to develop climate-resilient technologies intensified. The global market for drought-resistant seed varieties reached $4.8 billion by 2023. China filed 1,283 international patents for drought-resistant crops between 2020 and 2023, compared to 894 from the United States. For nations without these research capabilities, the options narrowed to either purchasing increasingly expensive, climate-resilient technologies or watching their agricultural productivity decline, a new form of technological dependency emerging from climate change itself. Chapter 7: The New Agricultural Alliances. The period from 2020 to 2025 saw a fundamental restructuring of global agricultural relations. Pandemic disruptions combined with climate volatility and geopolitical tensions undermined faith in the globalized food system that had dominated since the 1990s. In its place emerged regional agricultural blocs, groups of nations prioritizing agricultural cooperation among themselves. By 2025, 4 major blocs had emerged: the North American Food Security Partnership, the Eurasian Grain Collective, the ASEAN Plus Food Resilience Network, and the African Food Sovereignty Alliance. Intra-bloc agricultural trade increased by 27% between 2020 and 2025, while inter-bloc trade grew by only 8%. During supply disruptions, price differences between intra-bloc and extra-bloc transactions reached as high as 22% for key commodities. Perhaps most significant was China's unique approach. Between 2022 and 2025, China established bilateral agricultural agreements with 53 countries, investing approximately $65 billion in agricultural infrastructure projects in partner nations. These investments created 3.5 million hectares of preferential access cropland, land where Chinese entities held priority purchasing rights. By 2024, China had secured preferential access to foreign agricultural production equivalent to approximately 14% of its total food imports, creating a new form of agricultural influence that operated outside the bloc system entirely. Chapter 8: The Return of State Agriculture. Between 2020 and 2025, after nearly 4 decades of privatization and market-oriented reforms, governments worldwide increased their direct involvement in agricultural systems. Strategic grain reserves were re-established in 72 countries. State-owned agricultural enterprises were strengthened in 43 countries. Public agricultural research funding increased by 47% across G20 nations. Global public spending on agricultural programs increased from $700 billion in 2019 to $940 billion by 2024, the largest 5-year increase in state agricultural spending since the 1970s oil crisis. What distinguished this wave of state involvement was its sophisticated integration with private enterprise and technology. China's dual circulation agricultural policy maintained market mechanisms for most production, but established state-controlled strategic agricultural bases for key commodities, comprising 15% of China's agricultural land. Perhaps most consequential was the increasing treatment of agricultural land as a national security asset. By 2024, approximately 42% of the world's agricultural land was subject to some form of foreign ownership restriction, compared to 28% in 2019. The message was clear: after decades of treating food as just another commodity, nations had remembered that agriculture forms the foundation of national security itself. Chapter 9: The New Agricultural Superpowers. By 2025, 7 nations had emerged as true agricultural superpowers: the United States, China, Russia, Brazil, India, the European Union as a bloc, and Canada. These 7 powers collectively controlled approximately 68% of global grain production. 74% of agricultural exports by value, and 83% of agricultural technology patents. What distinguished these powers was not simply production volume, but their ability to leverage agricultural capabilities for broader strategic goals. Russia systematically directed grain exports to nations whose political support it sought at the United Nations. Countries that maintained neutrality or supported Russian positions received 22 to 38% more Russian wheat during shortages than those that opposed Russian actions. China's approach was more subtle but potentially more consequential. Its Agricultural Belt and Road Initiative provided comprehensive agricultural development packages that integrated Chinese seed, varieties, equipment, and digital platforms throughout production systems. These packages increased short-term productivity by 25 to 30%, but created technological dependencies, with switching costs estimated at 40 to 65% of annual agricultural revenue. For import-dependent nations, securing stable access to food became a foreign policy priority that sometimes overshadowed traditional security concerns. Egypt imported 12.5 million tons of wheat annually by 2023, representing 60% of its domestic consumption. Food subsidy programs supported by these imports benefited 72 million Egyptians, creating political exposure that directly influenced foreign policy decisions. The asymmetry was clear. Agricultural superpowers could leverage their capabilities for influence, while import-dependent nations faced increasingly constrained international autonomy. Conclusion: Seeds of a different future. As we reach 2025, several truths have emerged from the turbulent transformation of global agriculture. First, agriculture remains a foundation of power in our modern world. The nations that control key agricultural resources, arable land, water, genetic material, and critical inputs possess leverage that extends far beyond food markets into broader international relations. Second, the pandemic marked a turning point in agricultural policy. The era of ever-increasing globalization has given way to a more complex landscape where states play increasingly assertive roles in ensuring food security. Third, agricultural technology has become a critical strategic asset. Nations that control climate-resilient crops, water-efficient irrigation systems, and advanced digital platforms possess advantages that translate directly into food security and diplomatic leverage. Finally, Africa stands at the pivotal moment. The continent possesses 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, but remains a net food importer. How African nations navigate competing agricultural visions and investments will determine both the continent's future and the broader global food system. As we navigate this new agricultural landscape, we would do well to remember that agriculture is not merely about production systems or supply chains. At its core, it remains what it has always been: humanity's most fundamental relationship with the living world that sustains us. In the seeds we plant today lie the power structures of tomorrow. Choose wisely what you cultivate. The disclaimer: this book is a work of fiction designed to stimulate thinking about the relationship between agriculture and global power dynamics. While it draws on real agricultural concepts and general trends, the specific statistics, data points, named initiatives, and certain events described are fictional and have been created for narrative purposes. The author encourages readers to conduct their own research on these important topics using authoritative sources such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, academic journals, government agricultural departments, and established research institutions. This work is intended to provoke thought and discussion rather than serve as an authoritative source on agricultural policy or international relations. Any resemblance to actual policies, programs, or specific data is coincidental.